Okay, here we go. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the latest edition of our learning webinar series between TrainingPros and our partners at Harrisburg University. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. So to get started, we'll talk a few things about TrainingPros and what we do for the L&D community. There's a few things that we do on top of providing valued consultants to our business partners. We also have expert relationship managers such as myself that have a long history in the L&D field. Very large talent pool of consultants and various backgrounds. And really, we take the time to onboard these folks and to match them up on projects to make sure that they're successful. A little bit about myself. My name is Alan Spivey. I am the Northwest Arkansas representative for TrainingPros, the relationship manager. The majority of my background has been spent with Walmart and with Sam's Club. Fortune 100 and 500 companies, including Procter & Gamble and some other folks as well. Retail and manufacturing. Lots of marketing and creative work. Touchscreen and mobile applications for training and delivery to field associates and so on and so forth. Lots of e-learning software and lots of print and packaging design that really supports L&D when we deliver some of these pieces and projects. As far as TrainingPros talent, we kind of touched on, really what we do. Very wide range of services when it comes to L&D. Very knowledgeable and professional people that have spent their careers in this industry and really know what they're talking about. And again, we've done a number of these webinars with Harrisburg. Very good relationship for us, very good partnership. Really allows us to bring in some talent that, like I said, has real-world knowledge and is really able to jump in and answer questions on the fly and give us some really, really great information to take back and use in the workplace. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce the speaker today. His name is Larry Mohl, and he is CEO and co-founder of a company called Jubi, Inc. Larry?
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us today. And Justin, if you can bring up my slides, that would be great. Justin is our awesome tech support today in our webinar. So just a little bit about myself as we get this rolling. I used to serve as the Chief Learning Officer for the cell phone division of Motorola, as well as American Express Company, the CLO there, and as the CLO of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta here in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia. And did that role for about 10 years. And in about 2014 or so, along with my business partner, Mr. Terry Barber, we decided to really figure out what we could do to help organizations get to a place that we're calling modern learning, a frontier that we're all working on as learning and development professionals to really increase the impact of what we do in organizations. So today, what I would love to do on our webinar, and I just have to figure out here I go, okay. What I'd love to do on our webinar today is, we'd love to discuss what is modern learning from our standpoint. How can you deliver that? What are the implications for that in your organization? We'd love to review some of the shifts or the characteristics of what a modern learning organization looks like. Love to give you a chance to actually assess where you are on this journey to modern learning. I want to give you some examples of modern learning through a quick look at what it would look like on the platform that we've developed called Jubi, which, for those of you who are wondering what Jubi stands for, it's actually short for jubilant, because we really feel that learning shouldn't be boring and horrible. It really should be fun and engaging and achievement oriented. So that's kind of the whole idea behind the Jubi platform. And I would love to give you a chance to identify some specific actions you can take in order to apply some of these practices in your organization. So I'm going to share some content, obviously. I've got some poll questions, And I'm just going to start to get into it, and I'm hopefully going to leave enough time for some Q&A at the end. So let's start just by looking at the state of learning. And if you look at the surface, things look pretty good, I have to say. Some of the numbers that you're probably familiar with is over $165 billion in the US spent on training and development. The actual recent study by ATD shows that the spend per employee is actually gone up a little bit to $12.52 per employee per year. We also see that the amount of organizations using technology to enable learning has gone up pretty substantially, actually, which has driven the amount of classroom delivery down. Now, while I'm a strong believer in face-to-face experiences, it's also been a struggle for a lot of organizations to get below that 60% of classroom delivery, and we're seeing for the first time now really almost a balanced approach now in corporations between online and face-to-face delivery, which I personally think is a really good thing. And then this was one that I really enjoyed looking at, was that 67% of organizations are saying that they're emphasizing on-the-job learning. So that means that the message that learning and performance improvement happens close to the work is really getting through, and organizations are starting to move on that. So these are all really, really good things, and I think at a top level you would say that the industry looks pretty good. And so the question is there a problem? And in my view, we do have a problem that we need to look a little closer at. Some more interesting data quickly for you is that this is an index that is run every year with talent development executives, and they weigh in on what is their perception of the value of learning and development and the impact on corporate performance. And if you look over the last several years, these numbers basically just show that these folks mean that it's really only moderately improved from some pretty historical lows if you look at the raw data about perception of value. So that's troubling to me, and I know it's troubling to you. This is also pretty troubling that people say only less than 25% of training measurably improved business performance. And then a third data point, which is really the one that when I saw kind of gave me the willies a little bit, was that over 50% of leaders surveyed said that shutting down L&D would have no impact on employee performance. Now, those of us that work in learning and development know that that's just not true, but we do have an issue, and it's an issue of how do we deliver learning and development that results in demonstrable performance improvement? How do we do that at scale? And how do we do that that meets the needs of the modern workforce? So let's start to get into that a little bit. So when I talk about modern learning, here's a simple definition. Modern learning really is an approach that you can take so that you can reach higher levels of impact, at the same time embracing some of the key workplace learning trends that are happening all around us. And we're going to talk about some of those. Second of all, that approach then requires fundamental shifts in our talent development mindsets, practices, and capabilities. And as many of you I know are aware, these shifts start at the company level, not at the L&D department level. So it's very important that our companies start to embrace this idea and these shifts and the role of leaders and employees in learning. And of course, there'll be changes that we need to make as learning and development professionals. So let's get into it a little bit in terms of the impact part of the equation. Now, I know many of you are familiar, some of you may not be familiar with the Kirkpatrick model. And what I like about the Kirkpatrick model is while it's an evaluation model, it helps us to understand levels of impact that we can achieve with our learning and development. Of course, they've had a fifth lever, which is ROI as well. But one of the things that it's important to understand is that for most organizations that I work with and most organizations I've led as Chief Learning Officer, we've struggled in some ways on a consistent basis to get above level 2, meaning not just testing and understanding that people had a good experience and understanding that they actually acquired some knowledge, but really driving behavior change and impact to either talent measures or business measures in a consistent way. And it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that most reports show that maybe less than 15% of companies can get above the level 2 type of experience. So that's concerning, right? And that's leading to some of these perceptive data that we tend to see. And one way to look at this is that in the level 1, level 2, you can think of it as what I call content world. It's the world where learning activities are key. Workshops, classrooms, testing, making sure that people have some knowledge acquired through content in their organization. And of course that's necessary, but the question is it's really not sufficient. And the other part of the equation then is performance world, where we have development activities that are related to on-the-job application, to other types of activities, stretch assignments, coaching, other types of activities that take learning and move it into practice in the organization. And we know that we can push lots of content, but not necessarily get much performance. And that's the world that we're living in today. So maybe just hopefully a simple way of peeling apart the way that things work, if you will, today. And if I then would love to ask a quick poll question, Justin, so can you help me out with this? So we'd just like to see where you all sit in this this little model of, are you mostly working in content world? Are you kind of equal between the two? Yeah, where are you? Let's give it a second and let people kind of weigh in. And again, this is not a value judgment of you or your organization in any way. Just trying to kind of find out where we sit. Wonderful. We've got about 33 people in. Fantastic. Okay. Hey, Justin, can you go ahead and broadcast those results for us, please? All right. So here's a great finding. So you can see amongst our group, we've got about 44% that are mostly in the content world. And the good news is we've got about half the group that's saying, well, I'm pretty equal. I'm doing a lot of content stuff, but I'm doing a lot of performance stuff as well. And then just a couple people that are in performance world. So let's peel this onion a little bit more and see how we can move ourselves to a more equal or even more focused on the performance world. So Justin, can I get back to the slides, please? Fantastic. Okay, so on we go. So one of the things I wanted to point out was that, as many of you know, content in the world is becoming free or really cheap. And there's a lot of it. Probably the #1 training site in the world right now is YouTube. And it's good for some stuff, obviously. But one of the things that we just need to understand is that content is ever expanding. And so as it becomes easier and easier and easier to distribute content in electronic form or digital form, we have to be careful that we don't let our ability to develop content in learning activities outstrip our ability to actually apply what people are learning, therefore breaking up the learning and development equation. Because in the ultimate equation of talent development, it's learning plus development. And a lot of what I'm seeing is an over kind of focus on all kinds of neat and tricky ways to develop content, but not that much focus on what happens with the application, especially when we're doing things virtually or in digital form. So let's talk about some of these big learning trends that I alluded to at the beginning. As you all know, video instruction has become huge. Micro-learning is the new hottest buzzword, getting things done in micro-learning in chunks, short bursts of learning. Mobile delivery, getting things out to the mobile device. In fact, many people now are bringing their devices to work and expecting the organization to be able to deliver learning on their device. Game mechanics, adding badges, leaderboards, points, all kinds of fun things to drive up the engagement factor. And finally, social learning, getting people in community or just talking to each other. Most of it right now is tied to a course, but some people are expanding that idea as well. So these workplace learning trends are really important, and they are part of modern learning. It's also important to know that these trends are a lot about delivery. They're a lot about delivery and engagement. What are different ways of delivering so that the modern workforce, the emerging millennial workforce, as well as all of us baby boomers who love videos, by the way, and are addicted to our phones, love as well. So it works really well for all of us. But these are really important trends that we need to include in our strategies. But I've identified a couple others that I think are important if we're trying to drive impact up as well. And one is that we need to start to really understand how we can embed our learning and develop into the key performance indicators of the organization. I'll talk of this a little bit more when we start to talk about shifts. Second of all, blended journeys. How can we start to say learning can be deployed in a way that is a journey of learning, of doing things, of accomplishing things using multiple modalities and multiple activity types that are tied together. We know in all of our work as professionals of how skill acquisition actually happens, that it happens over time and through a blending of activities. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Third, there is a very, very strong movement toward user-generated content. We know that when users can weigh in on the content, can provide their insights, can challenge experts, that the adoption rate of that content goes up. We know that besides just putting people into social connection, that if we can actually develop communities with purpose around them, that we can drive up the learning and the application of that learning. And finally, learning analytics. We know that if we can be measuring things beyond the fact that somebody took a program or that they completed a program or had some test results, that if we can get a more robust set of learning analytics, that we can actually change the experience more on the fly and optimize it both for the employee and the company. So I would just submit to think about these other types of trends that we need to think about when we develop our learning ecosystem, if you will. So what I'd like to do next is just move into the shifts required then to become a modern learning organization, and kind of do that as we build a model together. And first I'm going to build it in a way that's going to feel a little bit complex, but then I'm going to really just simplify it into another model. Okay? So let's start here. The first shift that we need to think about is how do we move from having learning and development aligned with goals to having learning and development embedded in key performance indicators. And I'm using the words pretty carefully here. Every organization that I've led or been a part of, we've done a pretty good job at aligning our L&D plans and in some cases our goals to the business strategy. We'll talk about levels of maturity in modern learning, but at the highest level of maturity, you're really doing the goal, the learning and development planning in concert, not as an afterthought to the strategy planning process. But still, even in those organizations, I have found that our ability to go one step further, to actually double click down one more time and say, how can I really understand how what we're going to deliver, essentially, what's our logic by which what we deliver is going to affect key performance indicators that the business leaders are looking at, and get them to understand that direct line of sight, the better chance we'll have of demonstrating that value. So it's not an evaluation problem, so to speak, that we don't show impact. It's the fact that we're not necessarily really embedding our plan into the business plan. And so that's just a very key concept. There's some great tools on the market like impact mapping and other types of things that people are using to really, again, dive into, instead of saying, we want to improve sales, really understanding the levers that the business are looking at and how knowledge and learning and performance plays into that KPI. And then what factor of learning do you expect will drive that KPI improvement, and review it as part of the business plan. That is really, I feel, the next generation of our practice, and I know some people are doing that today. So just to kind of bring this a little bit more into some tangibility, if you will, as we've been working with companies, and when I was in a company, these are kind of at the high level, some of the big challenges that we worked on. And I wanted to see where you're putting your focus. So one area is improving operations. So again, thinking of the business first, how are we improving operations through the adoption of processes and practices that we're developing employees to do. Second area for a lot of people is leadership development, and really the business rationale for leadership development is, in a lot of ways, continuity, succession depth, continuity of the business, and growing into new areas. The third area is we got to grow revenue. A lot of us are trying to grow revenue, and so we work on sales capability. We're trying to build customer loyalty, ways of inspiring customer loyalty, and driving up all the measures that we use maybe on Net Promoter Score, or if you're in a hospital system, you might be using Press-Ganey or other types of indicators of service excellence. And then finally, many of the organizations are going through mass amounts of change, either with just structural change, cultural change, acquisitions and mergers, and all these types of change initiatives. And the organization's ability to change in a rapid way becomes part and parcel of their ability to be successful as a company. And so, Justin, if you don't mind, I'd love to throw up this second poll and just get a sense from everyone here. What are one or two of the areas that you're putting your focus in as a company right now where you're trying to make an impact? So if you don't mind answering the poll, I'd really appreciate it. You guys are good. You're quick. All right. Just going to give it one more second. It's got a lot of good stuff coming in. All right, Justin, do your magic, please. Let's show the results. All right, so you can see right now the winner is by a little bit of margin so far as leadership development. And as you know, we see this constantly. Leadership development is such a critical part of every organization's ability to be successful. And pretty evenly spread. Operational improvement comes out to be number 2. And actually, if you look at the recent ATD State of the Industry report, you're going to find that your results are very much in priority order with their results. So really, really interesting to see. So what I'd like you to do as we go through the next set of slides, could you please just keep a practical example in mind as I play with these next several slides, and we talk about the other shifts that we'd like to make in becoming a modern learning organization. So Justin, can you please take us back to the main slides? Thank you. All right, so the next shift is really about moving from an event mindset to a process mindset. And I alluded to this a little earlier when we talked about the journey. If you kind of decompose how learning happens, how really knowledge is acquired and skills are built, I think you'll find that it follows a pattern of people learning something, acting on that, reflecting on what they learned, and that cycle is like a little engine that that kind of continues to churn. And we can think about that as a journey, a performance journey. Think about any complex skill that you've learned and that journey. You've probably learned some things, and maybe that's been done through video or workshops, but you know, you've had to put it into practice, and then by that practice you've learned something by reflecting on what you've learned, and that deepens your learning, and maybe you acquire more. So if you think about anything, a sport, if you love to cook, a leadership skill, obviously we know that this doesn't work to just have events. Now we all know this, but there's an entire way that companies work where with the, again, connecting some dots, where we've got a lot of access to content and it's easy to deploy and it's cheap, we can kind of lull ourselves sometimes into believing that the learning component is what we need. But we know from human performance behavior science that we need to empower this whole loop. So I would just help you think about this, that where are there opportunities in what you're doing now to turn what you're doing into a journey, and we're going to talk more about what that might look like. Okay? So the next shift is the environment. So as I was talking about earlier, there's an old saying that content is king, and I would say that content is really, really important. Don't get me wrong, that not having great quality content is a problem, but what really rules for modern learning is the environment. How can we get an environment surrounding this little learning engine, this performance journey tied to business KPIs that supercharges the environment so that really knowledge can be applied, application can lead to impact. And we've identified some of the, from lots of research that I did when I was in corporate environments, but other places as well, what are some of these essential components of what I'm calling the engagement and performance environment? Number one is company and individual purpose. We know that when the purpose of what somebody's going through is clear and they can link their own purpose to it, we know that creativity goes up, stamina goes up, diligence goes up. Many of people develop programs and even processes that talk about the what and the why, but don't give the participants an ability to connect their purpose to the journey. The more we can do that, the more we drive it up. Number two is to challenge and support relationships. Think about what it's like if you're in a relationship and your manager is paying attention. In fact, most of the research shows that if all managers did when they were sending their employees to workshops is ask them what they think they want to learn before they go, kind of leave them alone while they're in the workshop and follow up with them to support them and ask them what they expect to do with what they learned, that application goes up by many, many fold. So how do we support this engine and that participant with an environment that not only supports them, but challenges them to strive for more than maybe they would strive for on themselves and not give up? Third is progress transparency. How do we make sure that we know where we are? As people, we love to know and get data about where we are in our journey. What's left to do? How close are we to our goal? How are we doing against the things that we set out to do? And making it transparent, not only to ourselves, but to our relationships is also key. Fourth is game mechanics. I know many of you here are probably playing around with gamification, the application of game mechanics and principles to non-gaming environments like learning. And if we can gamify the process, we've found that it really adds an essence of fun, an essence of engagement. And as you make the progress transparent with the relationships and the other employees going through the journey, you can have healthy competition and you can get people to keep coming back to a journey that's happening over time. And finally, I just want you to think about development communities. There was a time in the early 90s, I was actually the head of knowledge management for Motorola, and we were working on communities of practice. And we learned a lot that you can use communities as a way of organizing learning and development so that it's really flexible, it's really rapid, and it's really, if you will, learner or employee centric. It requires this engine to be in place and some of the other elements to make the community happen, but it's a really great organizing construct. So again, just to summarize on this slide, because I know it's a big one, is that what we want to do is create an engagement and performance environment, and how can we start to spend as much energy on this as we are on the content? That's the challenge. The fourth shift is really about what we measure, because as you know, you improve what you measure and you can report what you measure. And in many cases today, because we have a bias toward content in some ways, we can use measures like knowledge acquisition measures and some measures, but and those are important to do as a set of measures. But that gives us really after the fact evaluation, so that we can maybe improve the course or the experience for the next group of people. The question I'd like to challenge us with is, how can we embed measures into the process of learning so that we can optimize that experience even as employees are going through it? So if there's still things left to do and we can find out what's important to them, maybe we can tweak and modify those things that are actually haven't been experienced yet, because we're taking a process mindset. So this is very akin to those of you who are schooled in Six Sigma, continuous improvement, those types of methodologies. How do we use that thinking in our learning methods? That, to me, would be a modern learning approach. And then finally, we can't get away without talking about technology, right? So how do we really use the right types of technology in an ecosystem that allows basically employees, managers, sponsors, leaders to be in the experience together, to play their role, and have an easy way of integrating their access and their contribution. So making it, having social technology, mobile technologies that are more integrated, potentially bolted on to your current learning management system, or completely standalone development systems, or using, there may be more advanced features in your learning management system to make these things happen. But the bottom line is, we know that the current workforce is very much tied to its phone, and the more and more we can do to enable the right things through technology, the more we'll be able to drive this type of model. So those are the 5 shifts that I wanted to talk about, and you can see how they all come to life in this model. Now again, as I said at the beginning, this may seem a little bit complicated. There's a lot of stuff on here, so I'm going to go through a really quick process of making it much simpler. So the way that I think about this in a very simple behavioral formula, or more of a performance formula, is that we have to have a focus on content, a focus on learning. We have to then hopefully multiply that with an action focus. We have to multiply that with an engagement focus. And if we do those 3 things together, we get a performance or a results focus. So this is where we came up with our methodology that we call Learn, Do, Inspire. And all of that other thinking that I just shared with you was really, again, research and study that we've done over the last couple of years to understand how could we make an experience built in software that would allow people to easily implement modern learning, if you will, without too much duct tape and glue. How's that? So how that comes alive in kind of the architecture of Jubi is that learning is done in short and engaging micro-learning little, we call them quests. So you can learn a little bit and you can do it over time. You can then be assigned tasks to do that can be managed and validated by somebody else in your network, a buddy, a peer, a boss, a coach. So somebody's actually getting to see what you do on the job and give you some guidance on that. And then social community, which is how do we inspire people to actually collaborate? I know from all my work in communities of practice that it took energy for people to start to share their knowledge, to start to be inspired by other people in the community. But the more we could get people to do these things, the more this community kind of took off, and they started solving problems together and being much more transparent with what they were doing well and where they needed help. And if we can do those things, of course, we can get the results focus, which is how do we actually validate that the learning's transferred to the organization. So maybe just a simpler way to think about it: learn, do, inspire equals performance. And again, the big thing I want to kind of drum on a little bit is that for many, many years, except for very simple types of, let's call it very strategic types of opportunities like executive development, high potential development, we've mostly focused on the learn piece and have not really done as much, let's call it predictive work, in the do and the inspire piece. Okay? So I'm going to just keep going forward, and then we're going to, so that I can make sure we get to some questions and discussion, if that's okay. So what I want to do is share the Jubi experience. The reason I want to share it is because I want to give you, again, a tangible example of what this might look like as you pull together all these different elements of modern learning. So let me do that, and I'll just run through a series of slides to give you a sense of what that might look like. This is a program that's called Lead to Inspire, so it's a leadership development type of program. And what happens in Jubi is that the learning happens, as I talked about, in a series of quests. Every tile here represents 10 to 15 minutes worth of content. And it's set up as a journey so that the employees can go through that journey over time. And as they dive into each quest, they'll be presented with challenges. And the challenges can have some media, some content, and they can have questions. So you can have many different types of questions, any type of media, and that media can actually be streamed in from any media source. This can also be a link to a class. It can be a link to a website. It can be lots of different ways, again, of managing the learning process and using different content schemes and different types of learning activities embedded within the same learning journey, if you will. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a learning journey, and you can come into challenges and you can learn stuff, which is really great. The second piece, though, is that based on what you're learning in a quest, you can trigger to-do items. And again, the to-do items are things that you design to be on-the-job practice, application, demonstration, things that you can do to apply what you learned. So again, from a learning pedagogy standpoint, think of what's in here as learning about things, learning why things are important, learning frameworks for things. This is about learning how to do things, getting practical application. So I come in here, and in this case, I actually had to go create an engagement poster with my team, which was part of the process. And then what's fun about it is that I actually have somebody in my network called a buddy. And that buddy can be anybody, but that buddy actually validates what I'm learning and can provide me feedback. In this case, Terry's my buddy, so I actually switched from myself as a user to my buddy as a user, which is Terry. And Terry's actually can give me feedback all kinds of ways. He can actually coach me, he can give me some bonus points, he can do different things that, again, give me feedback about what I'm doing. And then even more importantly, there's a set of reflection questions that I can pose. So again, driving that little performance cycle, learn, do, reflect, and then get feedback and continue the process. So that this way empowers that engine with help from other people in your supporting network. As we talked about inspiration, anyone in the community can come in and encourage others, appreciate others, share their stories. So again, this drives up the collaboration factor, and the fun thing about this is that the person actually doing the inspiring gets the points and the rewards. Because again, we're trying to encourage and reward, if you will, almost behaviorally incent people to encourage each other, to inspire each other. There's a way of making this very tight link between business performance indicators and what's happening in the learning. So if you think about the model, theoretically, right, what people are doing on the job, the behaviors they're taking that are getting validated by others, should align in some way to the change in key performance indicators we're syncing. So what we're building into Jubi is a way for you to actually visualize, map that and visualize it. So you'll actually be able to map your to-dos to your KPIs and then get a dashboard that helps track the progress to KPIs. Now, let's say that all this great stuff is happening and you're starting to see the KPIs move, because as you know, the KPIs are going to be lagging indicators compared to the actual learning that's going on. So that's all great. You can start to see that that's happening. And if they're not happening, the great thing is now you can take the idea of whether people are actually doing the work off the table as a variable. Many times we put out great training and we don't see the data on the lagging data move, and we're still left to figure out, did they actually do anything we asked them to do? I've had this experience many times as it relates to sales training and sales models, where we had a behavioral model, a competency model, we trained everybody, and off they went and the numbers didn't move. But we really weren't sure if people were actually doing on a consistent basis the behaviors that were in the model. So again, we're back to square zero to say what's going on. So the idea here is to build a way in modern learning that you can be diagnosing what you're doing as you're doing it. A couple other things that just round out the engagement and performance environment. There's a leaderboard, so you can kind of see how you're doing, have that kind of fun sense of healthy competition. You can earn badges, you're earning points, and you can earn them for kind of baseline things, the things that you're supposed to do, but also as you upload content, as you engage in discussion, as you inspire, you earn what we would call engagement points that show discretionary effort. You've got this network and a discussion forum, again, that is pointable, that allows you to create and moderate discussions. And finally, there's a dashboard, which allows you to see real time in a very transparent way, as we talked about before, what an individual is doing, what a group is doing. So again, you as any individual user or a manager or a coach can come into the environment and quickly say, here's where I can insert myself to help make sure this environment is tuned to the way we need it to drive the kind of behavior that we want to try. So hopefully that just gives you an example using a leadership development program of how Learn, Do, Inspire, how the little performance engine and the supporting environment actually gets realized within a software platform. So, I know I've thrown a lot at you in the last 40 minutes or so, and I'd like to just cover one other topic and then open it up to questions. One of the ways that I'm trying to help organizations is to have them kind of see where they are in what I'm calling the modern maturity model, modern learning maturity model. And so based on just lots of experience and work that I've done over the years, I've put together this model, and it comes into 3 levels. And I'm still working and would love any ideas and improvements to this model that you might have, because it's definitely a work in progress. I'm calling level 1 more of a traditional training organization, level 2 an enhanced organization, level 3 a modern learning organization, and you can see there's a context. So each level has a context. For example, in level 1 organizations, the organization is rightly so trying to reduce risk of operations. They look at training as a cost factor, and they're doing a lot in compliance and operations. Level 2 looks at more a way of improving key operational things like productivity and quality. They probably have some competency models, and they look at it that way, and they're probably doing all this stuff plus leadership and functional development. In level 3, it's really seen as a way of executing the corporate strategy and a way of capturing new value. It's really talked about almost on par with the other strategy planks of the company. And probably there's work going on in learning how to learn, in culture, in change. So there's a context, and then there's some key characteristics like how integrated with the business, what's the mindset of learning and development, what levers are being employed, what's the culture like, how is the experience being optimized, and what type of technology is being used. So what I'd love to do is just give you a second to kind of look at this quickly, and then what I'd love to do is have Justin pull up the poll. Not quite yet, Justin. Please get a sense of where you are. If you just look at these factors, I'm kind of level 1 mostly. I'm between level 1 and 2. I'd be level 1 plus. I'm level 2 plus, or I'm level 3. And then I'm going to ask you to just, if you'd like to, just respond to the poll question. So go ahead, Justin. Give it a rock. Thank you for giving us your 2 cents. I really appreciate it. It's very interesting coming in. Good answers coming in. Okay, Justin, let's show it. All right, so here's where we have 36% or so are level 1 plus. Level 2, about 30%, and level 2 plus about 19%. And so that's great. So what that shows us is that we're mostly in this sweet spot around level 1, around level 2, and which is great, which means that we've got a lot of good things happening, and also a lot of opportunity to potentially apply some of these ideas to what you're doing to actually improve your maturity, so that you can, again, deliver learning that has more impact and really do it in a way that ticks off a lot of these big trends that we're seeing in the corporate environment. So, Justin, can you go back to the slides for a second? So, what can you do? What can you do? Well, here's some ideas for you. Again, there's a lot of different ways that you can move forward depending on where you are, but here's just some ideas to get you started. You can work to take one idea, like take something where you can really prove, Like sales training works really well, customer service works really, really well. And see if you can create a logic model where you embed what you're doing into the KPIs of the organization. Very simply, start to let your organization, teach your organization that real learning happens, behavior change happens through a process rather than an event, and become a process engineer, a learning process engineer. Lay out a sequence of events where people learn things, they do things, they learn things, they do things, and lay that out almost like a journey map for people. Combine learning, doing, and inspiration. You take a program that you have right now and just do more sustainability on it. I know a lot of people we talk to are trying to figure out how they sustain what they're doing. So one of the ways you can do that is just to create doing activities that reinforce or put things into practice for a very specific period of time. We have found that somewhere between 6 to 10 weeks of weekly practice on something will really start to embed it into the person's habit formation. On a more broader scale, how can you take pieces or the entire engagement performance environment? What can you do in gamification? What can you do to just get managers engaged? How can you surround people with peers and associates and coaches? Integrate your delivery approaches. See if you can find ways of making sure that your social stuff is integrated with your more self-directed technologies. As I said, use the gamification and then these sustainability strategies. So again, just some things that you might be able to do. And my dream today would be that you'd identify one thing, no matter how small or how big it is, that you'd be able to do one thing that would be able to increase the impact of what you're doing and start to take advantage of all these trends that are coming our way that are really exciting and moving us to a new way of learning in organizations. So with that, hopefully I left enough time, and would love to open it up for questions and conversation. What's your reaction to this, and what thoughts and questions do you have? Okay, I've got one question that's come through. I'm just going to speak these out. We had a question come through from Christine Russo. How do you encourage learning with organization when the feedback is people are too busy and don't have the time? Yeah, that is the ultimate thing we hear as learning professionals. Here's what I can tell you about this, is that from my own experience, is that this is one of the reasons why our approach is to make things very chunked in nature. And I think this is one of the things that micro-learning, that topic, starts to address. How can you find 15 to 20 minute blanks in people's time and embed learning into their workflow? We did this at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta when I was there, looking at shift change and how could we embed learning that was important, either process learning, protocol learning, things like that, into the workflow. And the more that you can do that with short and engaging, bite-sized chunks of learning, the better you are. Now, not the downside, but the thing to pay attention to that is that there has to be at some point where you kind of connect the dots for people so that those bite-sized chunks become a story that matters. Imagine that you watched a movie and you took that movie and you chunked it into 10-minute chunks. So and then there was 2 hours between every 10 minutes. It would be very hard to understand, how you knit that together. So it's also important that you do spend time either at the beginning or along the way knitting together the larger story. So I hope that helps a little bit, but it's really about the short chunking of learning. I have a question. What is the best way to roll out process updates to an organization? There's lots of ways to do this, but some of the things that we're working on with, for example, with a call center, is where, again, you get in our view, it's like a quest. It's pushed out. So basically, it shows up on your desktop as a learning object and with an application ability as well. So it shows up as kind of a learn do, and it has either video, voiced over video, or some other type of media that helps people understand the process or protocol update. And of course, having it targeted by role is really, really important. But again, more and more we can make this feel like performance support and get it close to the work, the better and better we're going to be. What success have you had selling your solutions to larger corporations with complex, robust learning organizations? You know, while obviously I don't want to take the time to talk about, you know, Jubi and all that, what I would tell you is that we've been really successful with this because even in complex organizations, what we're finding, and the organizations that I came from were complex and robust in the learning practices, the ability to do the integration of these things in a seamless way was very, very difficult. So again, I experienced a lot of, let's just call it heartache trying to stick together pieces of technology into a methodology that would be complete enough to drive behavior change at large scale. So we're finding it a great conversation and a place. Now, I wouldn't tell you that, and I'll answer the next question, which was how can Jubi act as an LMS? What we're not saying in any way is that, you know, Jubi or anything like it is going to replace your LMS. In fact, it's really about having the right ecosystem. What we say is for things where you know you want to get above level 2, you have to have a more robust framework. And what Jubi really does is it plugs into an LMS and can share data. It can be launched from an LMS. And so it really, think of it as a plugin to a learning ecosystem with a more integrated delivery scheme that can drive behavior change. So that's how we think of it, and that's how it was designed. What was one surprise you had, an unexpected consequence, or something else that you learned when executing some of these things in an organization? That's awesome. So I'll tell you, it's always a surprise. One of the things is, you know, as many of you know, with gamification, gamification always leads to interesting conversations and sometimes surprises. And the way I've been, quite frankly, pleasantly surprised at for some organizations that their leadership didn't expect it. Let's put it this way, that having this kind of healthy sense of competition was going to be really fun and engaging for people. And it was unexpected by those leaders, and in some cases they fought having any point systems. And then when we tried it, it really turned out to be one of the really fun things, and one of the things that drove engagement in the platform. I would say that we've been some of the things that we've learned based on the realities that you've talked about in terms of getting people in organizations who are busy to really engage with this. What probably our biggest learning overall has been to work with organizations to set up a rhythm, to set up an expectation of how much of this they're going to do over what period of time, again, so that it fits into the lives of people and can create impact. And that's probably been the biggest learning. So we set up, when we implement, we set up a rhythm kind of methodology of how many, quote, quests per month or to-dos per month are going to be expected, and then we can measure against the expectation. And that's been a really great way of doing it. How do you run an effective survey with the owners to get the feedback about the learning experience? Well, one of the things that's really nice about, and I didn't share it with you in this particular, in these screenshots, but Jubi has a built-in open question format and a polling ability. And again, any kind of questionnaire or survey device can be embedded as a challenge within the platform. So we actually capture data about employee sentiment, about what they're looking for, about what they need, right in line with the learning. So for example, sometimes people will use several quests before a classroom, and they'll ask polling questions or open-ended questions about users' desires and needs and what they want. And then afterwards, we'll do the same thing in terms of what they're experiencing in terms of applying things and their take on the entire experience. So again, think of a survey as just another activity in the journey, and that's what we're building into the platform. It says you use peers as valuation. Do you have any studies how that works in relation to get the manager involved instead? Fantastic question, and I don't have any studies currently, and it is one of the things that we are actively researching in both. We're doing some work on internal companies. We're also doing some work with patient education and compliance against the disease of asthma and COPD. And so we're actually starting to put studies now against what is the right peer construct, what makes a difference, and how can we optimize again that peer construct. The thinking behind the platform that I'll be honest with you that I had was, as many of you probably have experienced what I have, which is it's hard to get to get managers really engaged. And some of them just naturally do it and some of them don't, you know? And so the idea was, how can we make sure that they at least have one peer, somebody else who cares and is, is working with them. There is some data, interesting, that shows that some of the best accountability partners are your family. So we're actually looking at how can we get family members involved even when it's a corporate, business type of improvement. Great questions, everyone. Fantastic stuff. I notice it's about 2 minutes too. So Justin, how are we doing?
We're doing okay. I just would like a minute at the end just so we can get some feedback about the presentation. So if you just want to answer like maybe one more question and then get your contact.
Let's see. Okay. Do we have anything else? Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, here's one from an audience customer's perspective. How hard has it been to convey the difference between MOOCs and Jubi? So many of you know the movement on MOOCs, massively open online courses, and again, MOOCs have a very an important place, I think, in a learning ecosystem. And for many of you who have been using MOOCs, again, the way that it's, I would say that kind of talking about the Jubi proposition works is easy when you talk about learning as a process versus learning as content. So as you know, I've taken some really good MOOCs myself that have been good at helping me understand some concepts. But again, I needed to do other things in order to actually take any of those concepts and bring them into my work life, unless they were things that I was already really good at and I was just brushing up on something. So, again, we speak of it as the difference between an event of a MOOC and a process of learning. That's the way that we kind of think about it. Justin, I'm going to throw it back to you. You got a minute?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Larry. That was,
there's my contact,
that was really awesome. I'll leave the screen up here.
Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it up for a second. We'll leave it up for a second so that you can, everyone can see that. I want to just take a moment and thank everybody. If you didn't get the information there, we can get it to you. Larry's contact information. I'm going to really briefly go through a few of our slides, promotional slides here, just reminding you about who we are. Harrisburg University, we have a number of graduate, undergraduate programs that are available, specifically our Learning Technologies Master of Science, which appeals to a lot of instructional designer and learning professional folks. Thanks always to TrainingPros, and thanks to Alan for introducing us today. We just have a great partnership with this group, so we highly value that. So thank them very much. And thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to click over to a set of feedback polls. If you could just let us know generally how we did with the webinar today. That's always beneficial. We take the feedback and we do review it for the sake of continuous improvement. So thanks for sticking around. Please fill out the feedback poll, and we will look to see you next time. Thanks a lot.